Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So tonight, we have with us, over this way, the always effervescent Tracy Baggiano.
Hello.
And Mala and Mike both had to be out. Mala has an excused absence. Mike has an unexcused absence. 3 more of those, and he gets in-school suspension. So we're going to be on the lookout. Chat, we're going to be on the watch for Mike. If you do see him, call the Shop Talk truant officer, and we'll make sure to bring him in. So, got a few things on the agenda, but as always, Shop Talk is chat-driven, chat-led. If you have questions, we probably have answers. Between Tracy and me, we have answers. Now, they're sometimes even correct answers, but we will say them with conviction. And if that's what matters, we know how to do that. Before we get too far into that, though, do want to talk about Past Summit is currently open, looking for people to attend. And if you're one of those people, you can get $175 off your Past Summit registration using the discount code Azure175. And so wanted to make that call out. Last time around, Mala talked a bit about pre-cons. Even if you're not going to a pre-con, even if you don't want to go to Seattle, you can still register, go online. That'll be in a few months. I am currently in the process of putting together my one talk, which will be delivered pre-recorded, and I will not spoil too much, except that there will be more effort on this presentation than any other presentation I've ever delivered. So there will be a lot more in the way of editing and niceties of the presentation, rather than me just talking to a camera.
Can you edit mine too?
Probably not. No, I'm not a very good editor.
But I need a good editor for mine.
Yeah,
I am delivering a pre-recorded talk for Summit as well, and I'm terrible at editing, so I need a good editor.
That makes sense. I tend for pre-recorded for a regular session like that, I just wing it. I just go through the whole session. If I have something where I completely bomb, fine, I'll cut. But usually I won't cut out the ums, the uhs, the ers. If I'm doing a video or recording for YouTube, you may notice that I tend to write a script. I tend to follow a script. You might even see me moving my eyes on occasion, because I'm not very good at reading from transcripts. I've gotten a little bit better, but go check out YouTube videos, and you can see me move my eyes if you look closely enough.
That would make me do more ums. I have to read a script.
That could make sense, yeah.
Because I would have to go and stop to look at it.
There is some pretty good teleprompter software, and the issue with teleprompter software is that you need to have the mouse controlling the teleprompter, which means that if you're just reading, if you're straight reading, not worrying about slides, not worrying about anything else, if you're doing an audio track only, you can have that mouse and you're just scrolling. And sometimes I even have the mouse in my hand. I'm sitting back here. I'm scrolling through, and the teleprompter font is high enough, it's large enough, it's tight enough on the screen so that your eyes don't really move very far, and then it looks a lot more realistic. It's as soon as you have to switch slides where things get a little trickier. I've seen fancy rigs where people have foot pedals for teleprompters. I've seen people use a second device like an iPad or a small tablet or something. And those are options as well. You can use teleprompters that do auto timing. But what I've noticed is auto timing forces you to speak at the timer's pace, which means that if the text is scrolling like this and you have a fairly simple line, you're going to have to slow it down because you need to wait for the next line to get there. Whereas if you have a lot of information that's packed, or several multisyllabic words slammed together, or a particularly difficult to say bit, then you might find yourself rushing through to try to catch up. And now your pace is not dictated by the quality of what you're saying. It's not dictated by the theatrics or the rhetoric. It's dictated by the tool. And as a result, it ends up not being quite as smooth.
You never thought about using teleprompter software?
That makes sense. Yeah. For a live presentation or for something that's full length presentation, yeah, I wouldn't use teleprompter. I would only use it for compact. I want this to be a 10-minute video, or even I'm recording a course. So when I record a course, absolutely, it's all pre-written, in part because you need closed captions. And in order to get those closed captions, well, you need a transcript. Using certain tools, you can generate a transcript after the fact, but now you're having to go through the transcript and make sure that the words that the transcript thinks are correct were, in fact, the right words. So,
yeah, don't trust PowerPoint.
Yeah. Or the Azure. Most of it comes from cognitive services. There's an endpoint that will allow you to do speech, and it is useful. I use it in Teams presentations. I use the live transcript, the live captioning, and it does a decent job, but it does not do a great job, and it does not do a job that a professional would want to have to publish as part of something, especially if I expect someone to pay for it. So that's going to be handwritten, then spoken, then overlaid. So usually it's about 3 or 4 steps in a process for that little 5-minute segment. Part of why it takes so long to make a course. At least a good one. You can make a really bad one pretty fast. So,
yeah, I've been writing mine. I'm learning containers.
Yeah. It's a very interesting and important topic for development, for administration, both. It makes life a lot easier for trying things out. It makes life a lot easier for testing.
That's what I'm using it for, so people can develop an environment to try what I'm doing on and reproduce it and stuff, and be able to test things.
Yeah, I've got several talks that are that way, where you could follow all these instructions to set up Jupyter, to set up R, to set up Python, to set up the data, to set up the servers, or pull this container, run this, and go to this URL, and I've done it for you, and you're going to have a much better time going through my talk, because all of that is preamble. It's to get you to where I want to talk about. For example, optimizing backup performance. If I have to have you set up R as a DBA, some people might enjoy that. A lot of people will not enjoy it. A lot of people will say it was too much work. So how could I possibly do this in my own environment? And that's where, okay, grab this container and you can try it out yourself. And when you're done, stop it, delete it. No harm done to your system. It also lets you do things like try out SQL Server 2022. And that is, interestingly enough, the first topic of the evening.
Good segue.
Yeah, funny how I segued to that. And I'm actually just going to move this up the list of our docket. There we go. So now it's the first topic of the evening. It was previously like the 4th topic, but I figured, you know what? I've got a segue. I better use it. First time in my life.
Off topic for a few minutes, but
yeah,
it's interesting.
First time in my life I've ever said that, and now I kind of want to pronounce it the French way so that people don't think I'm thinking of the little 2-wheeled move you around thing. Which, since we're rambling, chat, you got to save us from the ramble. But back when segues were just coming out, they were moderately popular. I was working for a state agency, and lunch buddies and I would go outside. We'd go walking to our normal place for lunch, and we would see Segway tours around, and came up with an idea called Segway Safari, where the idea is that the Segway tour happens, but then we have a tour that's running concurrently with paintball guns. And if you tag one of the Safari people, if you tag one of the Segway people, then you get points. And based on how many points, you have the winner of the Safari. So that never went anywhere, but in retrospect, I think it would have been a good enterprise. Now, the Segway people would have been very upset, but can't make an omelet without breaking a few heads. That's what I learned from Ren and Stimpy. Also, chat, I want to let you know that my senescence is going to be awesome because I can already ramble without any idea of time, theme, or topic. When I'm old and can't tell the difference, it's going to be that much more fun. But let's talk again about SQL Server 2022, because that was where the Segway went, and then we kind of went a few blocks up the street with the Segway, and now we got to bring it back. So, Tracy, have you tried out 2022 yet?
Of course I have.
Good. I actually haven't. I've been too busy on other stuff.
What's wrong with you?
No, I take that back. I did try it out in pre-build. I've not tried the CTP, but I tried it out as part of the program, the EAP, Early Access. So I was able to try out a couple of things, but not the CTP yet. It's on my agenda. I will try out probably the next CTP. But what are your thoughts so far?
I like it. I'm looking to implement it at work. We've got several upgrades we need to do, and I'm just going to skip 2019.
Kind of makes sense, yeah.
Why bother? 2022 is coming.
That is true. Hopefully 2022 won't have some of the problems 2019 had. Where
problems.
Yeah, 2019 had a few issues. I mean, considering that there was a CU that got pulled back, because by installing this CU you could corrupt a database in certain instances. It wasn't a really common approach that would lead you to corrupt a database, but the fact that it was possible was kind of a fail for QA.
You can do that with VMware now, so.
That's true. We have many more avenues to corrupt our databases. all that opportunity, all that choice. So
I need to get off old hardware, so I'm like, let's just jump to 2022 and shoo.
Sure, that makes sense. Combine that with new hardware and
give me some distributed AGs and shoo.
Yeah, I expect to see some pretty nice improvements in terms of performance. We had Pedro Lopes last week talking to us about some of the intelligent query processing changes that are coming. Some of them that are already in 2019. We've got some new syntax. I think there's more new syntax this time around than any version since 2012. It's nowhere near the size of 2012. I mean, 2012 was an enormous release for database developers. 2022 is going to be, I think, a moderately large release for database developers. Bigger than 2016, definitely bigger than 2017, bigger than 2019. And 2014, for database developers, didn't add much. Memory optimized tables, cluster column store indexes, but still, as far as core SQL syntax goes, there wasn't a lot that was added to 14. But 2022, we have generate series, which has a few problems at the moment. I'm hopeful that those are just early bugs that get fixed, or early limitations that get fixed, where, for example, Eric Darling had a series on some of the wackiness with generate series involving, if you go parallel, weird things happen. You can a query can deadlock on itself using generate series in parallel, which was interesting. It's not too common that you get that outcome, but it is possible. Still, between that and improvements to window functions, being able to define a window is really big. I am legitimately somewhere on the excitement meter, definitely above 0 when it comes to being able to define windows. I don't want to overhype this as, high excitement, because I don't know that I'm capable of that level of excitement, but it's definitely above 0. I'm like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, Tracy. I only get 6 frames of animation per episode. So I can't use them on excitement. I already have indignity and existence, and that's all I got time for. But yeah, on the development side, there's a fair amount that's coming with 22. On the admin side, my favorite
part is Query Store.
Oh, so quick synopsis: what's coming up with Query Store that's got you excited?
I like having it the ability on the AGs for read-only parts, for when you do read-only queries over there, because like we used that a lot at our previous job. Mm-hmm. To read-only intent stuff, and not having the ability to, force the plans was like, crippling.
Right.
And stuff. So, and then the introduction of being able to do hints for queries and stuff is pretty cool.
Yeah. There's a couple of hints that I want to see that are not available in Query Store hints, but the large majority are available.
Those are my 2 favorite things.
Makes sense.
And it's a little bit more control, the more control we get, the better things, For us people who know what we're doing, the better.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking it's good to see some updates to Polybase, external tables to S3. That's something that I've wanted since 2017. Yeah, since 2016. It would have been early 2017. It was before SQL Server 2017 that I wanted for S3. It's like, we're going to focus on Azure stuff first. Okay. But they are, it looks like they are there. I saw Anthony Nocentino has a blog series in which he's going through using some pure storage arrays and using their S3 interface to allow SQL Server to connect and write out to it. So that's, or to read from it. To read from it. You can't write out over the S3 interface. So like Polybase V2, you're not going to be able to write. Unfortunate. Maybe that changes in the future, but external tables, external objects with S3, you'll be able to read from. Backups to S3, though, you obviously can write out to. So you can take a backup to S3. And that is obviously going to let you write. So if you're in that AWS environment, I think it opens up some possibilities. And also, if you do want to try out SQL Server 2022, I do recommend using the containerized version for the CTPs. That way you don't have to try to install it on your devices, because, well, CTPs tend to be a little bit finicky and hard to get rid of when the time comes. So I would definitely recommend getting it in container form. And I'm pulling up the notes where you can grab the container. I just need to, well, here are some release notes. What we know so far. This is from a couple of weeks ago. and up at the top there is a download SQL Server button, and it'll let you try things out in a few different ways. So you can try it out. You could even try it out, for example, on your virtual machine in a cloud environment if you so desire. I'm not going to stop.
The release candidate for SSMS yet?
That is a good question. Let's find out if there is a public preview for SQL Server Management Studio 19.
SQLServerUpdates.com will tell you, I think. Go to
Yep, well,
then.
Microsoft Docs does have the preview for SSMS 19. So this is preview 2, released on May 24th.
That way you can play with new features there too.
Yeah. So should be. I expect we'll see a few more previews of SSMS before everything goes live. As of right now, it's a good opportunity to try things out. You know, like I said, do it in a environment where you're not going to have any problems.
Yeah, SSMS runs better side by side
Yeah.
than SQL does.
That is true.
And uninstalls better.
Also true, yeah.
And it'll replace itself over and over and over without like killing things.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, because you know.
Right, because SQL Server.
Because you said the other one did.
Especially CTPs. CTPs are a little notorious about leaving stuff behind.
Well, we had fun with that at Channel Advisor. CPT, CTP, CPP, RTM, CUs.
Right.
Over and over and over. Then
like,
through
why are we having this
2017
problem?
on top of the 2016 ones. And
Yep.
I remember doing all that.
Yep. The amazing thing was it all worked.
Right up until the Thursday before I left.
Oh, it's funny how that works out.
I upgraded the last 2017 machine the Thursday before I left. I did good. I was so scared I was going to mess it up, and people thought that I did it on purpose. I was afraid it was going to break, and people were going to think I did it on purpose, but it didn't happen. So much pressure.
Yep, but it worked out. It was a smooth release. Now
I had it down to a science.
I mean, that's what you do, especially when you have dozens of servers to do. Get scripts, get process, follow process.
5 APs a night.
Yeah. Until you find some weird person like me who has a special server that has to be its own unique little thing.
Yes, you and your R server.
That is a thing that happens. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a vulnerability.
That thing came out of nowhere.
It did come out of
nowhere.
Your
introduction and the vulnerability.
A little bit of both, yeah. It was rhetorical mirroring. So that was. I'm showing off all my skills.
The emails about it just like, and I was like, where'd that come from? It's like in like all the versions of SQL. It's like, what the heck?
Yep. In case you're not aware, which makes sense because not many people were aware when this dropped. Actually, it was almost a week ago, but there was a vulnerability in SQL Server, every version, guaranteed every version 2014 to now, maybe in 2012, except that Microsoft's not providing support for that anymore. So maybe it wasn't. No, you know what? It wasn't in 2012.
Could be 2005. Could be 2000. You just wouldn't know.
Actually, you do know. You do know. I know how you know. This was in partitions. So the CVE. Check out the link in chat for what Microsoft has released. They won't tell you how. They don't have an exploit that is publicly available, and they have not seen it exploited in the wild. So this is something that either Microsoft themselves figured out or a customer was working with Microsoft and figured this out, but nobody has done any sort of announcement of how. And what it is that if you write a specially crafted query using $partition against a table with a column store index. So what that means is cannot have been on any version prior to 2012. And my guess is, given that 2012 had read-only non-clustered column store indexes, it probably was not affected. 2014, when we introduced clustered and updatable column store indexes, that's probably when this issue was introduced. And we don't know what the exact process is, but the statement from Microsoft is that the attack complexity is high because in order to exploit this vulnerability, quote, requires an attacker to take additional actions prior to exploitation to prepare the target environment, unquote. So it's not as simple as I have access to your machine, I can run some select star $ partition and then execute some arbitrary code. Can't do any of that. At least this is what Microsoft is saying. So there's something that is required that they're not telling us and that nobody has figured out yet publicly. And so therefore, go grab the latest GDR for any version of SQL Server 2014 to 2019, and you'll get patched up to date. You won't have to worry about this issue. If you have 0 column store tables and this vulnerability comes out, I don't know what it means for you, because it could be that an attacker could create a column store table and then run some operation, and then vulnerability gets exploited. Or it could be that something else has to happen beforehand, which may be not possible. Who knows? Until we have concrete details on what the vulnerability is, I'd just recommend go grab the latest GDR. The link that I posted in chat there is from Microsoft's Security Resource Center and does include information on the KB that you would need to search for in order to grab the latest update for your version of SQL Server. Aside from that, if you look, for example, at MITRE is one of the go-to places for resources for security vulnerabilities. If you're ever feeling bored one day, just go to mitre.org and you can scroll through all the different security problems that the world has and realize that we're all screwed. But in this case, for this particular vulnerability, basically the description is Microsoft SQL Server remote code execution vulnerability. So it can be done remotely, has to be done over a network, and that's all that they have. We know that it was assigned in April. So the problem was discovered at least in April, and they've had a couple of months to work on it to make sure that they actually got the fix in. But that is about it. And this is uncommon because generally a CVE record is going to have a lot more details. So if I, for example, I just want to do a quick look and see if I can find anything of interest, like CVE 2022-22318. So that's IBM Curum Social Program Management. I don't even know what that thing is. It's from IBM, and I could search for the record for that CVE. And again, I pulled this completely out of hat. Inside there, we have confirmation details. We have information on patching on vulnerability. So there's a bit more information. For Microsoft, every piece of that information ties back to the one MSRC blog post, or excuse me, article that they put up. So, and even if you go to, for example, SQL Server, and that is the KB for 2016 SP3 GDR, essentially it says somebody could do this thing that we copied and pasted from the other article, but we're not telling you any more details about how it could happen. So that's all we get for information. We will probably learn more in the next few weeks. Usually what happens is patch goes out, and then either the people who reported it put out the fancy blog post to say, hey, we came up with something, we worked with Microsoft, look how fancy we are. Or people will reverse engineer the patch. They'll try to figure out what got patched, what DLLs changed, what processes changed, and use that to attempt to figure out what was the possible method, the vulnerability there. How do we exploit it? So we may find more information in the upcoming weeks. But at least for now, go patch those servers. I mean, that's sound advice in general, even if there is no active security alert, but worth double mentioning. So our next topic, had a little conversation with Mark Gordon, friend of the user group, and Mark had a question about, hey, there's some servers that he was working with that had SSIS-DB in full recovery mode, and the question was, does that make sense? Why would we have SSIS-DB in full recovery mode? You have any thoughts on that, Tracy?
Well, I've never really looked too much into the SSIS-DB, and I have a ton of them right now, and I always keep everything in full mode, so except maybe master and MS. Well, no, I keep MSDB in full model, depending on the system. I don't know why you wouldn't.
Yeah, basically, I could see it going either way. What was interesting was, in that case, that was an environment where they didn't have anything else in full recovery mode. It was MSDB, model, and SSIS-DB. Maybe report server. So most of their databases were in simple recovery mode, and just a couple of them were full. And so it was a question, well, why would this be? Is it necessary to be? And necessary? No, most of what the SSIS-DB is responsible for is holding catalog data for integration services. So what that means is configuration settings, package details, even package executions, execution logs, so history of what things ran. You can store the binary packages in SSIS-DB itself. You have credentials that can be stored in there. You've got things that are worth backing up.
I mean, I still treat it like a system database.
Yeah, that's
however important you think your system databases are is how you would treat it.
I think that's a fair point. Yeah, I don't think I would put special emphasis on it versus any other database versus user databases. But if you are using full recovery mode, you know what? If you're taking those transaction log backups and it's part of a normal process, just let it be part of the process. I don't think you need to, but it doesn't hurt.
You don't have to, but there's no reason not to. I mean,
yeah, I would agree. I guess
either way.
If you don't want some transaction log backups, but I don't know, delete them. Yeah.
Yeah, or just stick it in simple so it leaves it out of whatever script automatically takes them. Hopefully you're using a script.
Yes, that is.
Don't get me started on a tangent. Yeah.
I do enough tangents on here. I think you're allowed to do a tangent every once in a while.
Well, all I got to say is seeing a report server temp DB log file that's 800 gigabytes is ridiculous.
Okay. I don't think that should be
Along
all
with the
you've got to say.
SSIS log file that's 200 gigabytes.
I don't
Ridiculous.
think I can stop you right now. Like that was enough information. How do you get a report server temp DB database? Mind you, this is not report server. This is not the reporting services report server database. This is the temporary database where reporting services dumps off data that never needs to be used. If you
you stick it in full recovery mode,
and nobody ever takes a backup,
and you you put it on a development server, and evidently at some point in your career, you disable every job on the server.
as one does. I mean, those jobs just slow you down.
Every job.
You got to be high speed, low drag here.
And it grows.
I guess. And then eventually you run out of disk space.
And then you leave the company, and a new DBA comes in and goes, "Why is this so big?"
No, it's got to be that large. Microsoft says so. Microsoft doesn't say that.
The new DBA comes in, runs SP Blitz, and it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. So to give everybody an idea, perspective, report server temp DB typically is measured in megabytes. You might have, I don't know, several hundred megabytes on a really busy report server. You might hit a gig or two. Yeah. I've never seen a report server temp DB that anywhere near that large. It's usually in megabytes.
Yeah. It was quite entertaining, some of the things I have seen recently. Even at my last job, some of the things I've seen on, as you've heard me rant past year. I'm just
take care of those servers.
Do what? One of my favorite things that I've seen in the past year is when people leave a company and they own a job and it's been running and it hasn't really been running.
Right, that Active Directory account gets shut off,
and then the only person getting an alert on the job is the person who's left the company. So you magically put people in a DL that was the only person in there, and then you start getting an alert, and the other people are like, "What is this?" Oh, and you're like, "Oh, we're a team now." The other people on the team weren't included in the magical DL. So
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I don't want other people to see my dirty laundry of alerting. I don't want them to know how often my stuff fails.
Oh yeah, there's a tad bit of cleanup going on in a few jobs I've been at over the past 4 years.
Right.
Good news is, guys, this is all development environments, not production. Thank goodness.
Although it's bad enough for development environments.
I know, but at least the company's not gonna die.
That's fair. That's fair. Unless their SAN is the same for dev and prod, and then you run out of disk space on the SAN because you have 800 gigs of report server temp DB.
Well, it could be like the time that we had log shipping and the system got corrupt, and we found out that the F drive went out that had the logs on it, and the SAN that we were sharing it this with the secondary server as well. So we had no secondary on production, and at this company, you couldn't ship the product without that server or make it. The good news is I was taking log backups every 15 minutes to a different place. And we happened to have this secondary server that we had taken away from another system, just sitting there doing nothing because no one would shut it down. And it was faster and newer than that system. So my boss wouldn't make an executive decision. So I did while he was talking to other people, and I restored everything over there. And by the time he got back, I was like, oh, it's restored over here. I was like, what did you do?
I colonized that server.
I made a decision.
Yep.
I was like, I can't believe you guys are sharing the disk behind the scene. What kind of redundancy is that?
Right. Yeah, no, that's, if you're going to have redundancy, make sure it's actually redundant. Understand that this, yeah, I have 2 installations of SQL Server. Everything's fine. Oh, they're sharing the same disk on the same hardware on the same compute. In the same network. Same network cards in the same rack in the same data center.
In the same
that way it's faster.
And everything.
It's faster that way. I don't have to worry about network transit. Yeah, I just set up my AG group on the same server.
Everything. It was all the same. They were just like right there beside each other in the same rack and everything. I found all this. I was like, you did what?
It's more efficient.
Oh yeah, the good old days. That was a job where I tried to get information on the hardware when I came into the company, and the sysadmins hated me because I wanted that information. They would never give it to me.
Yeah,
they gave it to the consultant that they hired when he came in, but they wouldn't give it to me.
Well, the reason for that, 2 reasons for that. Number 1, you're a security threat because you're not a sysadmin. So therefore, you're a security. That's kind of how things go.
I wasn't even allowed to know the RAID levels of the drives.
Right, because hackers know that information, Tracy. You can't understand RAID levels. No,
they couldn't either. They didn't know what difference. They didn't know what a RAID 10 was.
RAID 10 is just 2 RAID 5s smacked together.
They had all my logs on the RAID 5s and all my data on the RAID 1s. I was like, they had it all backwards.
Right.
The consultant got them straight.
Yeah, so that is one of the nice things about consultants is that really good consultants will come into an organization, will talk to the people who know what's wrong, will understand what is wrong based on what those people say, will write it in a fancy report that other people up the higher in the company will look at and say, whoa, I'm glad we hired this consultant so that he could figure out what was going wrong.
Yep, exactly. It was hilarious. Because I just handed him all this data and he was like, wow, you just saved me 2 days of work.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even joking about that. That outcome is so common, and that is one of the more positive outcomes that consultants are essentially a pressure release valve for low-level employees so that they do not go crazy and quit. It is an opportunity for them to explain because the people up the chain just are not listening, but they will listen to someone who's paid 4 times as much and comes from somewhere else.
Oh no, the last batch of consultants all had a betting pool going on how long it was going to take for me to quit at that company. Because they were implementing a SharePoint environment, but they were making it where you could do a B2B system, and it didn't make any sense to me at all why you would make SharePoint do a B2B whatever. But they needed help with the database side, and yeah, I helped them with that. But they had a betting pool going, evidently. I found out when I was leaving, to figure out when I was leaving, because...
I mean, hopefully the person who won took you out to lunch or something.
I got taken out to lunch by several of them. I don't know who won, but that's how I found out they had a betting pool. One of them told me when they took me out to lunch.
Yep.
They were like, we've been putting a pool together to bet on when you were going to leave. Because this had been like a 6-month project at that point. They seen how nutty I was going at that place.
So our last
Any more
topic for the
rants?
night. No more rants at the moment. Gonna talk a little bit about functionality in SQL Server. Had a question actually from Mike, who, recall everybody, is officially truant. That is going on his permanent record.
He's truant. We don't. He's not going to hear the answer. Shouldn't we say
Mike,
that for
you're
next
gonna
time?
at this point, Mike, when you get to the recording, we may save it for next time. Do you have any topics, Tracy? Because if you do, we'll talk about them. Otherwise, Mike's gonna have to watch the recording.
I don't.
Okay, Mike, you're gonna have to watch the recording. So
You're suspended, Mike.
that's not a suspension. That's just makeup homework.
Timeout.
So no juice box today for Mike, but you gotta work hard. Come back next time.
No recess.
No recess. Nope. But
Of course, that might be punishment. It's hot outside. I might send the recess.
today was very pleasant. Tomorrow will not be as pleasant. But Mike had a question. He's learning a bit, especially on the Oracle side, about materialized tables, materialized views, I should say, and wanted to understand in the SQL Server world, what is sort of the equivalent of materialized views? In SQL Server, we do have this notion of indexed views. The idea of an indexed view, you have a table. A table stores data, writes data to disk. We're happy about it. You can put a clustered index on a table to structure the way that the data is stored on disk, and we're happy about that. And then you write a view. Now that view is just a query, literally a saved query. That's all a view is. And sometimes we're happy about that. Depends on your view. Write views incorrectly, write views poorly, things start to suck. But as things start to suck, you have possibly an option. And I say possibly because some of the details do depend on what edition of SQL Server you're using. If you're using Enterprise Edition, life is a bit easier. If you're using Standard Edition, still possible, just more complex. And that is to take a view, slap a clustered index on it. Now it's written to disk. It's no longer querying. It's no longer a query. It is effectively a table. But it is a table that you don't insert, update, and delete directly. You have the underlying tables as they get inserted, updated, and deleted. They manage that clustered index for the view. It seems like a great trade-off. I have my base tables. My base tables get modified. My view that I want to query gets the data right there, and it's just written to it, and I don't have to worry too much about it. As a performance benefit, it can be pretty good, especially if you have a large set of tables, you're performing a lot of aggregation, and you frequently access this view. That said, there are some pretty strong limitations on what can be in the view. So for example, you can only use the big series of aggregates. You can use big ints, but not ints. You can only aggregate certain things. There are limitations to what you can include in your query. If I remember right, you have to have deterministic functions. You can't have non-deterministic functions like get date, get UTC date. That's off the top of my head. I could be wrong on that one, though. But there are some limitations for what you can include in an indexed view. Also, indexed views will have an effect on performance because let's say you have a few billion rows in some of those tables and you're aggregating them up to create a nice, pretty indexed view with just a couple thousand rows in it. Well, as those underlying tables get updated, you're going to have to rerun the query to generate that view. And that may take a while. So depending on how heavily those underlying tables are accessed, what you end up with is that any update to the underlying table ends up being very slow because it also has to update the index for that view. And you can end up in deadlocking situations. You can end up with even if you're not deadlocked and a process dies, you can end up with significant blocking depending on how frequently people are writing and how long it takes to make that update. With relatively small tables and small views, those updates tend to be pretty fast, but also the value of a indexed view is a lot smaller in that situation. So index views are basically a thing that I see, and there's a time in every developer's life when you just look at the index view and you say, that is the answer. And 85% of the time, 6 months later, you realize that was not the answer. 15% of the time, it was the answer. It was a good answer. So sometimes that indexed view does make a lot of sense. You can also add non-clustered indexes to your indexed view with a clustered index on it. So once you've created a clustered index, you can add additional non-clustered indexes and essentially treat it like a table. Again, this is a rarely thing. This is especially valuable if you have not frequently updated data. So let's say you do have billions of rows and you make an update once a day. You have some bulk insert, some bulk operation that does updates once a day. In that case, then perhaps an indexed view that aggregates down pretty heavily can be really useful. Most of the time, though, what I've found is, I'll call it slow man's indexed view, which is just have an aggregation table and you have a job that runs on some expected cadence to keep that aggregation up to date. Because generally, when you're talking about aggregations of enormous amounts of data, if you're off by 1%, most of the time people don't complain too much. Especially if you say, look, this is going to run once every 10 minutes. So your data may be up to 10 minutes out of date, but it's going to come back to you in milliseconds instead of minutes. And usually people will be okay with that. You'll find a lot of people who will start off saying that, no, I need to have absolutely the latest data. But then most of the time, either they don't notice the discrepancy, or it's small enough that they don't care about it, or the performance is fast enough that I'll just understand that basically you're caching the data and reading from a cache. And yes, the underlying data does update, but we'll get to it in a moment. That ends up being, I think, the more common route, because if you think about it, that's what a data warehouse typically is. If you do nightly loading of a data warehouse, if you do anything short of real-time loading of a data warehouse, you have followed that pattern. People who do real-time loads of data warehouses, if you're using, say, the Lambda model, and you have your Lambda architecture, and you have your speed layer where you're getting real-time data along with your batch layer where you've got pre-aggregated data and you're combining it together. Okay, sure, you're getting essentially real-time data warehousing. Everybody else, you're loading it once a day, once an hour, once a minute. Once a minute is still, you're waiting for a minute. And so, yeah, I ran this update, I have to wait a minute. Most of the time, in most business scenarios, people aren't going to really complain that much. You just tell them, okay, data will be there within a minute. Sometimes they will complain. Sometimes I don't see this yet. It's been a full 38 seconds. Okay, refresh the page. Oh, now it's there. So, indexed views can be a solution to a problem, but you really have to understand the nature of the problem, and it has to be that case where you're not doing a whole lot of updates, but you do a whole lot of reads, and you do a lot of reads of aggregations. If your view is basically select star from 5 tables joined together, creating an index on this really isn't going to save you that much time unless you have something that severely complicates the query. If you have a nasty where clause, if you have something that requires aggregation from a huge table. Those are the types of things that potentially make an indexed view worth having. In most cases, with a view, if you're just joining a few tables together, probably not worth it. Nonetheless, it's good to know about. And if you are on Enterprise Edition of SQL Server, you can use the with no expand hint that will say, do not expand my indexed view. Query directly from the indexed view. Do not look at the underlying tables. You also have the possibility that if you write basically the same query as the view, you can potentially just query the indexed view itself instead of taking these raw tables when they're joined together and doing the same filtering, the same operations as the view. Potentially, you can query from the view itself. Generally, though, I would say change your query so that it goes directly from the indexed view. That way you know. And also put a with no expand hint on there. That way you really know. Because, well, sometimes, especially with Standard Edition, SQL Server gets a little antsy and says, well, I could just query the base tables instead of this view. And then that obviates the whole point of having created the view in the first place. That, I created this thing because it's better than going to those underlying tables. But that is the value of indexed views. So in the next episode, we'll probably talk a little bit about inline table valued functions and how they're not nearly as bad as their cousins, the scalar functions and the multi-statement table valued functions. Where if you're using multi-statement table valued functions, it's okay. You just don't care about performance. And sometimes that's fine. If you don't care about performance, you got no problems there. But I think it's going to do it for us for tonight. We are just at the edge of the top of the hour. We hit our topics. Chat's been a little quiet tonight, but that's okay. Hopefully you enjoyed the various links to resources. And remember, tomorrow we are going to have Deepthi talk to us about using SQL notebooks. She presented for us last year, and glad to have her back. So she'll talk about notebooks. Next Tuesday, Tim Costello is talking to us about the toolbox for the BI professional. Got a couple of good talks lined up for the rest of the month. Hopefully we'll be able to see you in them. And until we meet again, everybody, take care.